Allopathic doctor presenting messages of health and wellness as the Lord leads. She loves research and demonstrates health practices through simple formulas that make sense and work. Dr. Herbert demonstrates God's love in her lectures and teachings. She is a member of the Berean Church of Free Seventh-day Adventists in Georgia and a willing servant who is strong on standards and principles. So at this time, if you don't know by now, these last names match. You heard from her husband earlier, Patrick Herbert, and now his beloved wife will come up and share with us a message on health reform. Amen. Amen.
Good afternoon. As we embark on this journey, let us just bow our heads in a prayer. Dear loving Heavenly Father, please be with us through these next few minutes and grant us all the enlightenment you would have us to have. We thank you for all your blessings so far. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. For the last 2 years almost, we have probably heard a lot of presentations, health presentations about COVID. So I'm not going to give you another presentation on COVID. However, there are some resources out there that might be of interest to you if you would like some more information on COVID and things pertaining to COVID. There are a couple flyers out there. One is called the Best Health Insurance. This particular addresses how to increase your immune system, how to boost your immune system, how to strengthen it. So this is, of course, good not just for COVID, but for any flu that comes along, seasonal flu, etc. There is a companion CD out there that also talks about the information in that flyer that you can pick up as well. And then in addition to that is another flyer called Phytonutrients for Protection and Recovery, particularly addressing what we can do. For one, if we are in a situation if we have to take a vaccination, what we can do, that would be a standard vaccination. And then what we could possibly do if we really were forced to get a COVID vaccination. So far, it has not really been a situation where most of us were absolutely forced to get a COVID vaccination. We thank God for that. But it still is some good information. Also, it provides information on there on what to do if you do get the COVID symptoms. Of course, that's not an exhaustive list, but at least it gets you started on dealing with those COVID symptoms. So that's the information for COVID if you are inclined to hear something more pertaining to COVID. So for today, though, we are not going to deal with COVID. We are going to instead do a presentation I have entitled Electrolytes for Life and Health, the Importance and Uses of Na+. And we will find out what Na+ means in a moment. Electrolytes, what are they? Electrolytes are minerals in our blood and other body fluids that carry an electric charge. That's why the word electrolyte is used. It kind of sounds like electrical because it is dealing with electrical manifestation. It has to do with the molecular makeup of certain minerals. These certain minerals happen to be sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, plus bicarbonate. These are considered our electrolytes. Sometimes chloride and phosphorus are included in that list, but usually if those 4 to 5 substances are taken care of, especially sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium, the others kind of fall into their place. Now, most atoms are in a neutral state. However, when we come to dealing with electrolytes, they have something very interesting about them. Now, atoms have a central part that is usually positively charged, and outside of it are the electrons, what we call electrons, that are arranged in shells or rings around it, and those are negative. When the center equals the outside, it's neutral charged. Okay, no problem. But if there's an imbalance or an equality between those two, between the central and the outside charges, then we have a difference. We'll have a charge to them. And what happens with Na, which is sodium, which is the chemical composition for sodium, there are 11 of these dots around the center. And how atoms are composed is like in the inner ring, it wants to have two dots, or 2 electrons. All the other shells or rings, it wants 8. That's the full capacity, and that's where it's the most happy is when there are 8. Now, interestingly, with sodium, there's just 1 dot in the outer ring, and that's not very happy. That's not very stable. So it likes to give away that 1. So when it gives away that 1, it ends up having a positive charge because there's more positives than there are negatives now, because it has given 1 away. That is why we say salt or sodium has a positive charge when it's an ionic state. Now, there's another substance or mineral that likes to take that donated 1 because it has 7 in the outer ring, and it wants 1. It wants 1 because it will then be stable. And so it takes that donated 1 from the sodium and says, okay, we'll have a nice little relationship here. You want to get rid of 1, I want to take 1, and they become sodium chloride. You know what that is? Salt. But that is how it is made up. It has this, it's like a magnetic bond that it has created. And that's what it's like when it's in its dry state. But now when it ends up coming into your blood and into water, they disassociate, they come apart, and are now manifested into the different charges, the positive or the negative. And that is why they are called electrolytes. They have an electrical charge to them. And these electrolytes are actually extremely important for body function. They have a number of functions. They produce nerve impulses and muscle contraction, including the muscle contractions of your heart. So that's pretty important. It regulates hydration. That's how much fluid is in your body. Blood acidity, which has to do with alkaline acid balance. It has to do with blood pressure. They also have to do with rebuilding of damaged tissue and other important things such as energy production and a few other activities that that is involved in. So without electrolytes, our nerves would not even function. Our nerves they have different branches. There's the central part of the nerve cell, and it has receiving arms, but then it has particularly a long arm too that it communicates with others. So anyway, a nerve message must go along these different branches that make up the nerve cell. And so it can be imagined like a fuse lit, and the spark kind of follows down the fuse. Now, of course, in the nerve, it happens a whole lot faster than in a lit fuse. What ends up happening is that as the nerve gets stimulated, maybe through pressure or temperature change, then there's a change in the cell wall of the nerve, and sodium or Na plus cells, Na plus molecules or atoms rush into the nerve cell. And then it recovers immediately. The Na plus, the sodium, ends up rushing back out of the cell wall, but that is fine because all it needed was an instant, and then the nerve message gets passed on to the next section. But without the sodium, that's part of that nerve conduction wouldn't happen. Nerve messages wouldn't be transported along. So we get an idea that if our nerves can't function, we are in a pretty bad state, aren't we not? Yeah, we certainly are. So electrolytes are vital, actually, for our health. And let's start to look at a little bit more information as to what are some of those things that electrolytes do for us. Electrolytes are involved in temperature control, fluid levels, again, we talked about hydration, cardiac rhythms. So if you have an irregular heartbeat, it may be because your electrolytes are out of whack. Respiratory rate, digestion, fluid transport across cells. Again, how much are your cells actually hydrated? Renal function, that is even in bladder control. Neurological function, and we just saw that for a minute there in the last slide, how electrolytes are important for that nerve impulse to even be registered on the nerve and even to be passed on to the next portion of the nerve branch. It's important for cellular communication. It's important for thought and memory, which our nervous system is basically a manifestation of the ability to think and to remember. All the senses, both gathering information and then transporting that message to the brain and to the muscles. So basically saying if we didn't have our electrolytes, you wouldn't even be able to move because the nerves are what stimulate the muscles to contract, and therefore we're able to move and do things, etc. Also for the sense of touch, energy production, glucose metabolism, etc., etc. There is one person that made a comment that said, "It is easier to count the stars in the sky than to list all the functions in the body controlled by electrolytes." So that's quite a statement. We know there are a whole lot of stars in the sky, and I think it's even the psalmist made a comment of who can count the stars in the sky. Well, if it's being compared to the stars, that means electrolytes are really, really important to our life and to our function. So let's go look at electrolyte imbalance now. An altered level of sodium, magnesium, potassium, or calcium may produce one or more of the following symptoms. Again, we're looking at electrolytes. And electrolytes are the sodium, magnesium, potassium, and calcium, as well as bicarbonate. Those are our principal electrolytes. And if we have an imbalance of any of those 5 substances, what can we expect? Irregular heartbeat, weakness, bone disorders, twitching, blood pressure changes, confusion, seizures, numbness, nervous system disorders, fatigue and lethargy, convulsions, muscle spasms, and cramps. None of those sound like a whole lot of fun. But those are some of the things that if we have an electrolyte imbalance, will create in us. So it's even the absence of just one of the basic 4 electrolyte minerals, we would cease to live. That is, we would die. So that's pretty important. What causes this electrolyte imbalance? If imbalance is so serious, it's something we do not want to find ourselves in that condition. What can cause electrolyte imbalance. Sweating during exercise or hot weather. Yep. So during those hot southern summers, and you're outside sweating, yes, that can cause electrolyte imbalance. And so adding electrolytes back into your body is actually very important. Heat waves, again, a hot weather, a report found that the number of cases of electrolyte imbalance increases significantly during heat waves. So something to keep in mind when we have hot weather, to keep in mind our electrolyte balance. Severe dehydration can cause electrolyte imbalance. Kidney disease. And that's because our kidneys are very much involved in maintaining the electrolyte, a proper electrolyte balance in our body. An imbalanced intake of the 4 minerals. In other words, if we're overtaking or undertaking any of those minerals, that we can have imbalance. Acid and alkaline imbalance in the body can also create this. And it's interestingly, it's these 4 minerals that are particularly important in determining whether or not the foods that we eat are what we call acid forming or alkaline forming. It is the balance between particularly these minerals and a couple others compared to certain protein amino acid, the levels of certain amino acids that determine whether a food that we eat is alkaline forming or acid forming. It's that balance between the two. So again, showing these minerals are pretty important. Congestive heart failure can influence our electrolyte balance and cause an imbalance. Cancer treatment. Some drugs such as diuretics and high blood pressure meds. It is shown that in one study, 20% of the patients taking diuretics that are commonly prescribed for heart pressure and heart conditions end up with reduced sodium and potassium levels. So those drugs to take care of some of these other conditions can actually contribute to an electrolyte imbalance. And then severe and persistent vomiting and diarrhea will contribute to electrolyte imbalance. So these guys do some pretty amazing things. However, there is one particular one of the electrolytes that has been maligned and marginalized to a very great extent. And many have advocated we should avoid it. And which one would that be? Salt. Well, those of you that have subscribed to that idea presently or in the past, I do want you to pay attention to this next item that I'm going to bring for your consideration. So we looked at salt, Na plus is sodium or salt. This is a quote from Councils on Diets and Foods, page 344. We're told, I use some salt and always have, because from the light given me by God, this article, in the place of being deleterious or dangerous, is actually essential for the blood. The whys and wherefores of this I know not, but I give you the instruction as it is given me. So here she's saying, and let me give you the context of this particular comment, and you can actually go and read it, is that somebody came to Ellen White and said, okay, you shouldn't be using any salt or really anything else to season your food. And she said, okay, I'll try it. And she said she became so reduced in strength that she had to change. And then she makes this comment, I use some salt and always have, because from the light given me by God, this article, in the place of being deleterious is actually essential for the blood. The whys and wherefores of this I know not, but I give you the instruction as it is given me. This is quite a profound statement, I find, for several reasons. For one, she's showing that God actually showed her this. How many times has God particularly pointed out and said, you need to eat that. How many times he has said, you need to eat peaches? How many times has he said, you need to eat broccoli? How many times has he said, you need to eat almonds? I mean, all these are good foods, but I don't know of any other case in where it has been specifically pointed out that this particular article needs to be in your diet. And she said it's actually essential. What does the word essential mean? Can't do without. We also have essential amino acids. What does that mean? That means our body cannot make it. It means that we cannot get it from within our bodies. We have to get it from the food we eat or from a supplement or something. That's what we refer to essential amino acids. We cannot make certain amino acids, so we have to get them from our food. And if we don't get them from our food, we're going to have some function problems because we're short of certain amino acids. So she's saying here, just like the essential amino acids are essential, salt is also essential. And she goes on and says, I don't know why. I'm just telling you as I've been shown. I'm just passing the information on. Well, today we have a much better understanding of why salt is actually so important. And so salt is not dangerous. Imbalance is dangerous. Now, of course, many people in America eat way too much salt. And so way too much salt is not good either. But switching to a whole food plant-based diet eliminates about 70% of the standard American salt intake, okay? If a person does that, and they've eliminated 70%, and now they're a good vegan, and somebody comes along and says, well, you know, you really should not be salting your food. Is that a wise thing to do? They've already eliminated about 70% of the salt from their intake, of their dietary intake, but now somebody said, okay, we can get everything we need, all the sodium we need from our food. And they say, okay, I'm not going to salt my food. Well, we're going to see in a minute a little bit more of some of those challenges. Normal salt intake does not cause high blood pressure, and that's usually one of the reasons why we're told not to use salt or to eliminate salt or to reduce salt. Normal salt intake does not cause high blood pressure. Now, of course, in other words, the standard American diet with the excessively high salt intakes is not the best either, but we could go to the other end of the spectrum too, and that is also very bad. So normal salt intake does not cause high blood pressure. Hydration, that is not drinking enough water, does cause high blood pressure, as well as low potassium and magnesium intake. So it's not really the salt that's to blame for the high blood pressure. It is our lack of, or our not drinking sufficient water, and potentially not getting enough potassium and magnesium. Where do we get particularly potassium and magnesium? Magnesium we particularly get from green leafy vegetables because magnesium causes the chlorophyll to be green. It makes the chlorophyll green. So it's the center part of the chlorophyll molecule. So eating your greens is really, really good, really important. Where do we get potassium? Well, from a number of plant foods, but beans or legumes is a real high source of potassium. So getting on a good whole food plant-based diet will give us a good amount of those things. And if you are drinking enough water, you really don't need to worry about your salt intake. Yes. Banana is good for potassium, yes. Yep. So if you're drinking enough water, you really don't have to worry about your salt intake because salt is going to wash out electrolytes. Sorry, water is going to, thank you. Water is going to wash out your electrolytes, including the salt. So what are the signs of too little salt? What's the first one on the list? Death. Now that may seem a little dramatic, but that's true. You could be dead this evening with not enough salt in your system. But you will not be dead tonight if you have too much, unless, you maybe drink a barrel load of it or something like that. But you're not going to be dead this evening on a standard American high salt diet, no matter how salty your whatever it is that you're eating is going to be. But you could be dead by this evening without enough salt. There are two individuals that I know that I believe that was their case. And you know what? They're dead today. They were dead by that evening. The scenario was apparently it was very hot. And because, they were into health reform, they were drinking their water. Probably drinking quite a bit of it, too, because of being very hot. But I don't think they were taking salt commensurate with the amount of water they were drinking. And so what happens is when you don't take enough salt, then when you're drinking a lot, it continues to force out the salt from your body, so you're sweating out salt, and you're drinking a lot of water, which forces more salt out of your body, and then your brain cells start to swell up, and you suffer brain damage, and you die. Not a very nice thing. So it is dangerous to not have enough salt intake. Some other signs of too little salt is asthma, arthritis, acidity, blood sugar imbalance. So diabetics should not go on a low salt, no salt diet. Irritability because of the depletion of serotonin levels. Serotonin is the neurotransmitter that helps us to keep calm and not upset and not angry and not irritable. Too little salt can also be manifested in lack of bladder control and leakage. And I have seen this from Africa to Australia to, where else did I see it? England. Literally. Different people in those different countries who have come to me and said, how can I keep from going to the bathroom all the time? It seems like as soon as I drink, I got to go find the toilet. And there was one lady I remember, she had to know where the next toilet was all the time. But interestingly, those were the ones that were trying to avoid salt. They had basically eliminated salt or reduced their salt intake to very, very low. You see, water follows salt. And it's because of salt that your body is able to keep the water in the body without it just going through. So if you didn't have any salt in your body to hold on to it and put the water where it needs to go, it's like in your mouth and out the other end, because the salt is what helps to grab it and put it where it needs to be. So that's a sign of too little salt, is excessively needing to use the toilet, especially right shortly after drinking water. Of course, anybody that drinks water is going to need to use the toilet at some point in time, and that's good. But there is a point it gets a little bit excessive, shall we say, and quick. Insomnia can be a sign of too little salt, excess salivation, muscle cramps. Muscle cramps are especially a sign between sodium and magnesium deficiency. If you get muscle cramps, consider particularly those two electrolytes, sodium and magnesium. Irregular heartbeats, such as racing or thumping heart, again, sodium and magnesium. Anytime you have any muscle problems or irregularities, especially cramping, etc., sodium and magnesium, look at that. Heart attacks, and we're going to look at that on the next slide. Salt can be helpful with coughs and clearing phlegm, and the reason for that is that salt cuts mucus. It helps to thin the mucus so it can be expectorated, it can be coughed up, it can be gotten rid of, and salt will do that. Salt is necessary for energy production and nerve function. So if you're having fatigue and those kind of things, and so if you are seeing yourself in any of these signs and you know you're one of those people that have cut your salt intake recently or sometime in the past, and you're experiencing these problems, it could be very well that you are not getting enough salt in your body, and that's why you are having the problems. This is an interesting study. In this study, it was found an 8-year study of a New York City hypertensive population stratified for sodium intake levels. In other words, they grouped them according to how much salt that they were eating. Found those on low-salt diets had more than 4 times as many heart attacks as those on normal sodium diets. This is incredible. So those on low-salt diets had more than 4 times as many heart attacks as those on normal salt diets. The exact opposite of what the salt hypothesis would have predicted. The salt hypothesis is that more salt, more heart attacks. But this study showed the exact opposite. Dr. Hillel Cohen, who worked on the study, determined no health benefits of lower sodium diets. So if you want to chase down that reference, that link there on the screen, will take you there. So salt is really not the villain that many have made them out to be. Made it out to be. Probably one of the reasons that there are those that have embraced the idea of salt needing to be kept low is that on the Gershom diet, originally when Gershom was figuring out what helped the cancer patients, he had them eliminating all of the meat and the salt-cured pork and all of that kind of stuff. So he had them throw all that out. And his patients got better. And so he saw that and said, okay, the meat and the pork and the salt have to go. But the salt was with the meat, and so they both got thrown out together. And so it kind of got embedded in the Gershom therapy concept that you had to eliminate the salt. However, I believe that it was really the elimination of the meat and the pork and all of that. That's how they got better, not the fact that they eliminated the salt. Maybe they did need to bring down the salt too. It was they were eating too much, but to throw it out entirely was going too far on the other end of the spectrum. Eating salt. It is difficult to get enough salt or sodium from the food you eat without adding salt, and that's true. We need at least 500 milligrams of sodium per day, up to 1,500 milligrams. So at least around there we need that amount of intake. The average American eats more than 3,400 milligrams per day. So yes, the average American is on the high side. But as we just saw, if we go to the other end of the pendulum swing, we are in a dangerous situation as well. Again, there are those that say, well, you can get all of your salt that you need from what you eat. You know, eating celery and well, I'm not sure just eating celery alone is going to give you all the sodium that you really do need. It seems like the best source of sodium, if you are trying to get everything from just a plant, from foods, is that a cup of coconut water provides about 252 milligrams of sodium. So if you're drinking 2 cups of coconut water a day, okay, maybe you could get by. But the majority of us are not drinking 2 cups of coconut water a day. And if you're not, we are going to need to supplement, when I say supplement, include salt in our diet. It's interesting that animals seek out salt licks. So if you could get all the salt you need from your plant food, it should be argued then that herbivores, the animals that eat plant foods only, should never seek out salt. But instead what we find is that farmers who raise horses and cows and things like that, they find that their animals do better when they put a salt lick out for them. They put a big old salt block out in their pasture, and the animals can come and lick on it as they see that they want to. And their animals do better when they do that. So in addition to the grass, they have the salt licks. And there are other animals that are wild, such as elephants and mountain sheep and so forth. They will seek out areas or ground where there's high levels of salt, and lick it or eat it or whatever so they can get some salt into their bodies. So it does show that that we do better with some salt added. And this is just a picture of some of these different animals, and these are some of the salt blocks that the farmers have put out for their animals to eat or to lick on. So the type of salt that we use can make a difference, and so we're going to start looking into the usage of salt, the selection of salt and the usage of salt. So there are three types of salt. There's regular table salt, and then there's sea salt, and then there's unrefined sea salt. Table salt, which we find on most grocery store shelves, this is a refined food. Consider it like refined white flour and refined white sugar. That is because it has been, all the other minerals have been stripped out of it. It's heavily processed and finely ground, and it's heated up to somewhere around 1200 degrees and bleached. And all the other minerals are processed out of it. And so it's just sodium chloride, and that is it. And then other things can be added to it that are undesirable. Undesirable additives such as fluoride, anti-caking agents. Some contain aluminum derivatives and corn sugar. So these are things that can be added to that regular table salt. But why? Why would there be a motivation to refine it to this extent? That's because the primary use of salt is not as a food additive or for food usage, but for industrial purposes. Only about 7% of salt manufactured goes for food. The other 93% goes to industry. And the industry requires chemically pure sodium chloride for manufacture. So since 93% of it is going toward other food, or not just food manufacture, but chemical manufacture, and they need pure sodium chloride, that's what's being manufactured. And well, some goes into food too, but it's all a matter of how the manufacturing process deals with this. Now, sometimes they will add iodine back to the salt, and so if we're not using this particular form of salt, we probably should have an iodine source, and that's pretty easy to get. You can either get it through kelp or seaweed or iodine supplements. However, what this form of salt is good for is for therapeutic purposes such as salt rubs and even poison ivy. Yes, salt is good for poison ivy as an external application. I know there have been and have done that. It's the best application for poison ivy. Have any of you ever had poison ivy? Nobody? So, okay. So you know what it's like. It's not a very pleasant experience. It's an itch like no other. I'll give you a little idea how to deal with it. I had a very severe case of it, and it was 3 weeks of misery until I came across the salt application. And forget about the stuff you get in Walmart and all this other kind of stuff that's for poison ivy. It does have some salt in it, but it's not of a level that's going to do much good, because I tried that too. So what you do, you get your poison ivy, and it's there itching and whatnot. So what you do is you dampen your skin with water of where the poison ivy rash is, blisters are, and then you put some salt on it so that it soaks up some of the water, and so it's like a wet salt rub. What's that? No, it does not burn. Does it burn? The question is not, it does not burn. But because it is rough, and when you apply it, you rub the area. And because the poison ivy rash itches so badly, it actually feels good to rub the salt on the rash, because it itches the rash without ripping open your skin. If you go and scratch your poison ivy rash with your fingernails, you're probably going to rip open your skin and burst the blisters and probably spread it even worse. But because the salt is just rough a little bit, it itches the itch without ripping the skin open. And as it starts to dry out, pat it with some more water and add some more salt. And if you have extensive rash of the poison ivy, it's good to do it in your bathtub so that the salt will just fall into your bathtub and you can wash it down the drain afterwards. So do that, keep doing that, adding salt, patting with some more water so that the salt stays damp and you can rub it. Do that for about 15 minutes or so. After that, wash it off and put calamine lotion on it, and you will have, in my experience, the first day was like 5 hours of blessed relief from the itch. And you do that then for a day or two. You can go down. I did that 3 times the first day. The second day was like twice. The third day was like once. So maybe it was a couple days of twice. But anyway, you start to be able to back off, and you get over your poison ivy. But this cheap old salt is the best thing for poison ivy. Sea salt. Sea salt is evaporated from seawater. It's usually not processed or undergoes minimal processing, and it retains some minerals. But it may be refined to some degree, so it may not be retaining all of the minerals. And there may or may not be iodine added. So this is a step better than regular table salt. But there seems to be quite a bit of variability of opinion in this category into saying how much better sea salt is compared to the regular refined table salt we just talked about. Instead, the premier salt to consider is the unrefined sea salt. This is the best salt as it is the whole salt. It retains all the minerals that are naturally found in it, and so therefore it is usually not pure white. Sometimes the grains are larger, unless whoever's making it has ground it down to a finer grain. You'll often find it in bigger chunks, and that's fine, whichever way works for your application. There are 3 popular varieties. There's real salt, which is mined from ancient seabeds in Redmond, Utah. This is the most economical and convenient option because it's right here in the USA. Doesn't have to ship it halfway around the world. And you and I know salt is pretty heavy. There's Himalayan salt, which is probably the most popular, but it's mined in Pakistan from ancient seabeds. And that's halfway around the world. There's also Celtic sea salt, which is from seawater harvested off the shores of France. So these are 3 popular varieties. These are not the only varieties available. The key, though, is that all of them have approximately 60 plus trace minerals, major minerals as well as trace minerals in them. And because of that, they're not pure white. If your salt that you have is pure white, it probably doesn't have the full complement of minerals in it. Real salt here has kind of a tannish look with some pink flecks in it. Himalayan salt really does have a very pink characteristic, pinkish orange or salmon characteristic color to it. Then there's the Celtic sea salt, which looks more of a creamy gray color. So they may vary slightly from sample to sample, but they pretty much share the same number and type of measurable minerals. Why is that? It's because they all came from seawater. And what seawater would that have been? Would have been back from the time of the flood, because obviously salt beds in the mountains in Pakistan or in the mountains of Utah, for them to have come from a seabed, it would have had to have been at the time of the flood, that they would have been deposited there at the time of the flood. So they're coming from a relatively same source, which is flood waters. they're going to have relatively the same minerals. Now, for marketing, some manufacturers do say, oh, ours has 80-some minerals. We've tested for 80-some minerals. Well, some of those minerals, they test it down to less than 0.00001%, but they still say, oh, it was tested for that. Okay, they were tested for that, but it doesn't mean that it actually is there in any measurable. The point being is that sea salt all came from the sea, and it's going to have a similar representation of minerals. The key is that it has a full complement of minerals, of various minerals in it. So this deposits of salt can be found in various parts of the world. Some years ago, we went to Peru, and at this location, this was considered salt works in Peru. And there's this whole hillside of little ponds, terraced ponds, that salt water was collected in these ponds and then the water was allowed to evaporate, and then the local people would come along and harvest the salt out of their little ponds. And then the salt water was allowed to come back into the little ponds again and fill it up, and then allowed to dehydrate, and the cycle would go on. Where was all the salt coming from? It was coming from a little stream. This stream was, if it was a foot wide, that was probably plenty. This little stream coming out of the side of the mountain. And talk about salt water. That was some of the saltiest water I have ever tasted. That was almost like a super saturated salt solution coming out of the side of the mountain. And that was providing the salt water for the salt works and the evaporation. And this is just a picture of some of the salt deposits from the water running over into the ponds. And what they would do is they would let the water go into one pond or a collection of ponds until they filled up, and then divert the water to fill up another collection of ponds. And so they had a whole system of supplying salt water to this whole hillside of terrace ponds to be able to provide salt. And it was good quality salt. We got some of the salt, and it was nice, good quality salt. Death Valley has a lot of salt there too as well. There's a close-up picture of some of those salt formations. Well, they're actually like almost crystals that are there. So there's about 60 minerals in this real salt. This is 60 minerals in real salt that has been noted. Of course, sodium chloride is going to be about the top of the list. Then we come down to other things, including magnesium and potassium and iron and a whole bunch of other things that are in this whole salt. So it shows that it does have a really, it is a good source of minerals and trace minerals. Which one of the salts do I recommend? You can choose any of those three. This is real salt. Real salt is the one that comes from Utah, and usually it is a little cheaper because it didn't have to get shipped halfway around the world. I do have some of the real salt that I can make available to those of you that want some after the presentation this afternoon. And this is the salt analysis of it. It's going to be a little hard for you to read, and I think it's even a little hard for me to read from here. But it's at the top is chloride, then sodium, then calcium. So it's a good source or a source of calcium. Sulfur, silicon, potassium, magnesium, iron, aluminum. And you might say, aluminum. But aluminum, how nature presents it to you, is different than something that has been artificially created or artificially added. We do use some aluminum in our functions, but again, it's how nature presents it to us the package that it presents it to us is different than an isolated manufacture of aluminum. So what is being presented here is a package. And then coming further down, there's even iodine in the real salt as well, the whole salt. So how do we use unrefined salt? Well, use it in the place of regular salt. And interestingly, if you use it in the same quantities, unrefined sea salt actually reduces your total salt intake. So a quarter teaspoon of real salt has 379 milligrams of sodium, but a quarter teaspoon of regular table salt has about 500 milligrams of sodium. Why would that be? Well, for one, remember that real salt has more than just sodium in it. It has a whole collection of about 60 other minerals that are in the composition. So it has displaced some of the sodium with these other minerals. So you're actually getting a little bit less sodium than if you're using the regular table salt. Then if also the fact that real salt or unrefined salt usually has a thicker grain, it's more coarse. If you're just measuring it out, it will have less because of it being coarse. The finer grain, the finer ground of the salt will actually pack in more or put in more grains of the substance because it is fine now. It'll put more into that half a teaspoon measure that you're using. So just the physical grind of the salt makes a difference. We can also use salt sole water, which is fully saturated with unrefined salt. Now, what is sole? It is, as I mentioned, supersaturated salt solution. And how you make that is that you take a glass jar, and I have one here, a glass jar, and you put 1 part unrefined salt, your choice of real salt, Celtic salt, Himalayan salt, as long as it's whole salt. Put 1 part in your glass jar, or put in maybe a quarter of it, whichever way you want to do it, but it's 1 part of the unrefined salt to 3 parts water. And under these circumstances, you can use distilled water because you want the water to soak up or to take up as much of the salt as possible. And you shake it up, and you let it and cover it. But cover it with a plastic lid, not a metal lid, not a canning jar lid, but a plastic lid. The reason being is that wet salt is quite corrosive on metal. That's why cars from up north in the more northern states where they put salt down for roads in wintertime, they have more of a rust issues because wet salt can do a work on metal. So you don't want to use a metal lid for making a salt sole. You want to use plastic because you don't want that metal in your salt sole. So you let it sit and settle out, and then what you do is you take a teaspoon of the water from the top. You don't dip down to catch the salt grains. You take a teaspoon from the top and add that or put that with a half a cup to a cup of water or of water or juice or whatever you happen to be drinking. So what would be the benefits of taking salt this way? It detoxifies the body by balancing systemic pH, okay, so it helps to bring back more of an alkaline condition. It improves hydration by providing trace minerals, so it's good to use when we're sweating quite a bit, these hot southern summers. Improves mineral status of the body, reduces muscle cramps by improving minerals and hydration. Again, most of the time when you have muscle cramps, it's not enough salt and not enough magnesium. And interestingly, my father, who just passed away at 93 a couple months ago, he was one that always did a little bit better when he took some extra salt. If he was outside in the garden for a good portion of the day, and he would come in, he would put some salt on his hand and take that in his mouth and then follow it with some water, and he always felt better when he did that. And you know, he never had a day of high blood pressure in his life, even though he took salt that way. So it helps really when you are out in the heat and you're needing hydration. Because again, the salt helps the body to retain the water. And sweating, you're losing salt anyhow. So reduces muscle cramps by improving minerals and hydration, helps balance blood sugar, supports hormone balance for everyone, no matter what hormonal issues. You would have never thought of that with salt or whole salt sole. Helps irregular heartbeat and blood pressure, balance blood pressure. Improves sleep by supporting blood sugar and hormone balance. Acts as a powerful antihistamine. You know, when we are getting allergies during the year or in the springtime, we can try this and see if it helps. It supports weight loss by balancing hormones and improving energy, and it helps support the thyroid and adrenal function, especially that has to do with if you're stressed out and things like that. And I do have directions on how to make the salt sole, so you don't have to try taking notes. I'll have this available for you afterwards. How to make salt sole, as well as the benefits of using the salt sole. Heat exhaustion. I'm going to come back to the salt and heat exhaustion because, again, this is such an important factor. Heat exhaustion. This occurs when a person exercises and works in a hot environment and the body cannot cool itself adequately, so you become excessively hot. Dehydration occurs with water loss from excessive sweating, which causes muscle cramps, weakness, and nausea and vomiting. This makes it difficult to drink enough fluid to replenish the body's water supply, and the lack of body water impairs further sweating, evaporation, and cooling. Relative humidity is an important factor, so in other words, if it's high humidity, it will also contribute to developing heat exhaustion. And after a while, your body temperature cooling mechanism just fails. So some of the signs of heat exhaustion, and this is probably what we need to know especially, is the signs of heat exhaustion. Salt cravings. So if you crave salt, listen to your body. It's not necessarily a bad thing that your body's craving salt. Extreme fatigue, even going to bed even earlier than usual and needing naps in the afternoon. So if you've been avoiding salt or if you have been in hot weather, you may need to be taking some of this extra salt. A loss of appetite, extreme thirst, during and after workouts, mild headache, and then finally nausea and vomiting and dizziness. And drinking lots of water and not feeling satisfied. Excuse me. So especially drinking lots of water, and not feeling satisfied, especially if you've been outside and, and you come in and you're drinking water and you just feel like you're not satisfied, you really may need a little bit more salt because you've sweated out so much. And then also making sure you have your magnesium and your potassium. Magnesium, again, from your greens especially, and your potassium, you can get that even from your bananas. Another thing that you can use that's part of the salt treatment, and that's called speleotherapy, or it's also called salt therapy. And it was used in Europe, especially in the late 1800s. It was seen to reduce asthma, reduce seasonal allergies, coughs and chest congestion, improves respiratory systems of smokers, improves skin conditions like eczema and dermatitis, improves lung function, and may reduce snoring. And so what happens is there's this little device here that has a nozzle at the top here. At the base is where the salt chunks, and it's a fairly coarse grind of salt. It's not huge chunks, but it's not like your table salt either. It's down here in the base, and then you inhale from this nozzle here. You put the nozzle in your mouth and you inhale, and that draws in water or the air across the salt, and you are able to get salt molecules into your lungs. And so that has been helpful for a number of these conditions. So that's something to consider, especially if you end up having lung problems, asthma, and allergies, and all those lovely things. Salt lamps. These are kind of neat. These can be used as part of your air purification program. Because they cause the production of negative ions in the air. And I think somebody talked about negative ions a couple presentations ago, as far as in the air, that's the most healthy part. So these lamps in your house will help the production of negative ions in your household air, which also helps to neutralize the positive ions, which have to do with pollen, dust, dirt, pollutants, and allergens. It's also thought to reduce the toxicity of EMFs, which are electromagnetic frequencies that are emitted from our electronic devices, especially our phones. And so you can have this in your house and have it on 24/7. And it's kind of a neat little decorative thing. Another thing that you can use salt for is in the neti pot. Neti pots are these little nasal pots, and it's interesting, they've actually become more popular, so you can get them even in some grocery store pharmacies now. But making the water salty doesn't have to be excessively salty, maybe around a half a teaspoon of salt to a container of the water, and you wash your nasal passages. And if you don't know how to do that, I'll let you search on the internet how to use a neti pot. It does take a little trick to getting it done, but it helps to wash out those sinuses. And it can help to reduce or eliminate seasonal allergies. It can prevent or alleviate sinus infection, can clear postnasal drip, and cleans and purifies the sinuses. Now, doing this neti pot and salt bath, you would not do this every day of your life. You would do it for when you need it. If you do it on an excessive basis, you could irritate your nasal passages, and you don't want to do that. Also, it could alter the flora that's in those passages, and you don't want to excessively tamper with that. However, if you have any of these problems, allergies and nasal infection, postnasal drip, sinus problems, doing this for a week or two and seeing if it helps, certainly give it a try. Also, doing a salt bath can give you a detoxification. We're talking about sitting in a bathtub of salt water. It is for detoxification as well as relaxation. If you want just a mild one, you can use 1 to 2 cups of salt. If you want a heavy-duty detox, you'll use 1 to 2 pounds of salt. So that's a fair amount of salt, and that will give you quite a cleanse as well. Usually these are about like 15, 20 minutes or so. Yeah, 15, 20 minutes. Yep. So the Bible says, ye are the salt of the earth. If salt was bad, why would the Bible say that? Otherwise, it would be saying, if salt is bad, then God's people are bad. And that's not going to be the case. So it does show that salt is necessary. According to the spirit of prophecy, salt is necessary for the blood. It is necessary for health. And so hopefully we'll have a better appreciation for salt. We really don't need to go on a low salt, no salt diet. The only time you really might do that is if you have a bunch of edema and you're trying to get the body to release that fluid, that extra water, you could greatly reduce your salt intake for a couple days, get that fluid to be released, and then add it back to a normal salt your food intake. Often a reason for edema, there are several reasons though for edema. One is if you're not drinking enough water, the body may be trying to hold on to enough water, so you do need to make sure you're drinking enough water. Another consideration is if you have congestive heart failure or kidney problems, and if you have congestive heart failure or kidney problems, then yes, you do need to attend to that, and that's a whole separate issue. But let us enjoy the salt of the earth, and may we season our food and season the earth both as we should. At this time, I think I have taken up my time. And do you want me to close in prayer, I guess? We can go ahead and bow for prayer. Yes. Sorry? You have muscle spasms? You have leg cramps and muscle spasms. Yeah. So as far as even in the as muscle spasms and leg cramps, even in the context of the presentation today, looking to see if you have enough magnesium intake, and also have you been trying to avoid salt? Or do you... Magnesium may be your case? Yeah. Yeah, but you have to work between, for muscle cramps, you work between sodium and magnesium. Okay. Yeah, okay. All right. So we'll go ahead and close out with a word of prayer. Dear loving Heavenly Father, we thank you for your instruction. We thank you for the things that you have given us for health and for life. And we ask for wisdom on how to properly appropriate all these things. And we thank you for that wisdom. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.